Welcome to Spotlight on Seniors. Today we have Chip Griffin, elder law attorney from Boothbay Harbor, along with his partner, Melissa Holmes Whitt. And we're going to have a little bit of fun today because you're going to get something unusual, free advice from an attorney. And we're going to, instead of trying to dive deep into any one topic, we're going to cover a number of topics, just kind of an overview of what elder law is all about, giving you some ideas about why you might want to consult an elder law attorney. I'd say pull out a notepad, take a few notes, and you're going to learn something today. So Chip, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you here.
Good to see you, Steve.
Melissa, glad to have you here. So we're going to do, as we talked about, a fast overview of elder law. But first, you, I know, as a person very dedicated to your community, and you do so much work beyond your own individual practice. And I know that when you write a mission statement, you take it seriously. And you have a mission statement for your own practice. Why don't we start by you telling us about that?
Well, we, in a nutshell, it's really committed to community. You know,
Yes.
that's really what we're about. It's about validating our clients, empowering our clients, and just creating a positive difference in their lives as well as our own. And it's really relationship based, particularly the elder law, estate planning, real estate planning parts of our practice are very, very relationship based, often over generations, and very deep relationships with people who have just come just a year or two earlier. They often share more with us than anybody else in the world. And so it's a very intimate and very valued practice for us.
Yes, you really get to know people over many years and even decades sometimes.
Precisely.
And could you tell us, introduce us to Melissa a little bit and tell us about her and your practice?
Sure, yeah. Melissa Holmes Whitt is her full name.
Yes.
And I've known her since she was in high school, but really had my eyes on her ever since she was in college and wanting to be a lawyer. And there were quite a few in my 35 years of practice from Boothbay, but Melissa, more than anybody, I really had my eyes on. And we knew after she went to law school, graduated summa cum laude from BU Law School, and then, or from BU and then from BU Law School, and then went on to work at a very large firm in Boston for a few years, very sophisticated types of work that they did. And we knew at that time she was then married and still is married, and knew it wouldn't happen. She wouldn't be able to come back to her hometown. And so we would still stay in touch, and but it looked like they were going to be either staying in the Boston area or headed to New York, where her husband is from. But her husband found a great job with the state, and he's back here. And they're both back here, and they've jumped in with both feet in the community. And Melissa, in my practice, started working well over a year and a half ago, part-time, and has been working this past year full-time. So, and she's fit in really well with our paralegals, Ann Mosher, real estate paralegal of 23 years, Sandy Paxson, an estate paralegal of 13 years, and our assistant Sarah Sherman, who's been with us, I think, 2 years. So it's been a great fit, and she is sharp as a tack and has really taken to the elder law part of the practice.
Wow, that's excellent. And I know you bring a really excellent educational resume and plus an amazing professional resume into Boothbay Harbor now to work in Chip's practice, so that's fantastic. So welcome. So let's dive in. We're trying to cover a lot of topics here. I'm going to give us a reset. So let's talk about your general law practice first. What are the types of things that you're focusing on, and either of you, whichever is best to...
I'll start. And then we have essentially two large areas of the practice. One is real estate related, one is more estate and planning related. The real estate is often the titles and the closings, and but also the real estate planning. And I found that many real estate attorneys are sort of like accountants. They're very good at doing the transactions, but they don't always focus on the planning. So that's a planning bent is what I've had for a long time. We also have an estate planning practice, which is comprised essentially of helping folks with their planning generally, life and after death, and also with elder law issues in particular, and estate administration, probate, trust work as well. So those are wide areas.
Yes.
But I used to do everything and gradually narrowed it all down. When I first started practice, most of my practice was court-related, and it's now not at all. We don't do court work any longer. So
Right.
so we really focus on those real estate and estate areas, and Melissa can probably describe the topical areas a little bit.
Okay.
I would just say that I see that the elder law aspect of estate planning has increased and continues to increase. We get more and more calls related to how am I going to pay for nursing home care? Do I qualify for assistance? Should I transfer things, or estate planning issues that will affect those issues, such as transferring assets to your children during your lifetime. It seems to be an increasing area of practice.
And how far do you advise people to contact you when they're looking at their own life plan? 5 years in advance, 3 years? What you got a rule of thumb for that?
Ideally, people come to us early, at least 5 years before it's conceivable that they could have some sort of significant health decline, which you can't anticipate.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to say, who knows that they're going to end up developing dementia at 60.
Right.
But the difficult situation we see people in is when they come to us at the time, and we call it crisis planning.
Yes.
Because they don't come until they're already there. And
Right.
at that point, a lot of your options are already off the table.
Right. Yeah, working in the healthcare business, what I really see is that we all know it's like a negative lottery. None of us knows what's going to hit us or how it's going to hit us. So really, earlier planning is much better. That you would just have to say that as a rule of thumb.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything you want to add into that, Chip?
Well, I think the other thing is we do need more elder care professionals of all sorts, including more elder law attorneys. I mean, Lincoln, Maine, as most people know, is now, by median age, the oldest state in the country.
Yes.
Surpassed Florida in the 2010 census.
Yes.
Lincoln County is the oldest county in the state.
Right.
And there are towns such as the town we practice in Booth Bay Harbor, which is went from the high 30s in 1990 to 56 in 20 years. And Bob Fontes, the Lincoln County planner, immediately correctly predicted that our schools would decline, particularly the elementary school, by 1/3. It already has. And the Bristol Peninsula is very similar demographically. There are towns such as Southport that is in the mid-60s for median age. Incredibly old.
Is that also because of younger people leaving for job opportunities? or-
Absolutely. Since 1840, youth has been our biggest export.
Wow.
And it continues to be that. It's accelerating. And the other piece that we're noting, particularly from our real estate side of the practice, is that most people who are moving in here tend to be in their late 60s, 70s, and 80s moving here.
Got it.
So that exodus of our youth is accelerating, and the introduction of our elders is accelerating as well. So it's really changing the faces of all of our communities dramatically. And we don't have the fiscal or financial will to be able to increase our nursing home capacity by 2 to 3 times in the next 10 years. We've got to do something different, such
Yeah.
as Chip Teal's method.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Were you about to hop in?
I was just going to say that living in Boston made me feel old because everybody's 18, 19 years old. But then I moved here and I feel young again. So it's
You are
great.
a mere child here, right?
And I have the same experience. Like we have our two daughters are living in Cambridge, and it is riding on the T's. I'm old.
Yeah.
Young here, but old there.
Yeah. There's something interesting that you do in your practice that I actually encountered in my personal life. You do, and it's unique to this area because people that own cottages, so cottage succession planning. You want to talk a little bit about that and some of the complexities that come up and why people might want to consult you for that?
Sure, and Melissa is extremely well equipped too.
Great.
In that area. The cottage succession planning is another area that most people don't realize. Maine is now #1 in the country for ownership of second homes. And there is a book out that I'd recommend to everybody because it would save probably 2 or 3 hours of attorney time educating on the various building blocks of succession planning, but it's called Saving the Family Cottage. And it's a great book. You can get it probably for around $20 or less, I think. But the point is that there are a lot of things that can be done for cottage succession planning, which sometimes the cottage is the glue that holds the family together. But if you don't handle it correctly, particularly when the folks who own the property, usually the grandparents and parents, leave or die, then and they want the next generation to take over, you've really got to make sure that that's what the next generation wants to do. And if it is, how are they going to do that? It's going to be much more difficult to do that. And so how to massage the use, maintenance, and succession issues is a real challenge, but it can be done. And there are all sorts of details to that.
And again, advanced planning, not waiting till...
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, because again, the cottage can be the glue that holds the family together, but it also can be the knife that shreds the family ties.
Yes, right. Well, that's what I'm seeing with some personal friends, and it's pretty sad, really.
Yeah.
You know, it's just there's an animus that is built up that gets hard to heal afterwards. So
Right.
I think people doing that type of advanced planning. Anything you want to throw in that topic before we move on?
Sure. I mean, I would say that I think that the difficult instances are when people come to us and they already jointly own the property, and then you're trying to work out an agreement. It's better to do it than to not do it, but at some point you may have one sibling, for example, who insists that their spouse be included, and it's a lot easier if mom or dad figures this out and has it set up before they pass, rather than having the kids try to agree on it later. Sometimes they can come to an agreement, but sometimes they can't.
Yes,
So.
yeah, exactly. Next topic. Something that comes up in my line of work a lot is the issue of you have a pillar of the community, respected all their lives, and now they've entered that period of frailty in their lives where they're no longer safe driving. And they have some level of cognitive impairment, and this is a problem all over our country. It's not unique here, and I've encountered it for years. And so I wanted to talk from the attorney's perspective, and when you're working with clients, can you just share with me how the lens that you look through on that issue, cognitive impairment in driving?
It's this very serious issue. I know in our town, the Booth Police Department are really very careful about this and communicate with the lawyers, with the family, as needed. And oftentimes, just because you're not the best driver in the world doesn't mean that you should have your license revoked.
Exactly.
On the other hand, there are way too many times when somebody's driving and shouldn't be driving. And the whole other problem is once you lose your license, a lot of people decline dramatically, particularly if they don't have drivers to drive them elsewhere. That's a whole other topic, but it's a health issue as to whether or not you can stay plugged in with other people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anything to throw in?
I don't know, from a legal perspective, I'm not really sure. You know, it's difficult because, you know, and this is true for nursing homes as well, they'll sometimes get in touch with us and want us to take over for somebody or make them do this. You can't do that. I mean, it's difficult because your right to impede on somebody else's rights, you know, it's a fine line, but
Well,
it's
it's a fine
difficult when
line.
somebody becomes dangerous.
And there's a moral responsibility,
Yes.
actually, to intervene because there's been the horror stories.
Yes.
You know, they're the things that are, as I said, even someone who's been responsible all their lives, and it's just hard to give up that license. And if I had one magic wand to wave, it would be that somehow people come to some wise decision within themselves about how to let go of that.
There are
at
all
the
sorts of
time.
practical ways that clients and families have resolved, and I have resolved these. Sometimes it's removing the distributor cap. You know, other times it's just making a decision and really facing it and dealing with it, depending on the person.
Yeah.
So it's generally requires a lot of input, not just from the individual, but from the family and friends
Right.
and other possible drivers and the police.
Right. So another area where cognitive decline affects people is within their own estate planning and husband and wife relationships, and let's reflect upon that a little bit.
The biggest misconception is that when somebody begins to lose it a bit
Yes.
and have some dementia,
Yes.
that they can't do a will or a power of attorney or a healthcare directive. Now, there may be different answers for each one. For example, there's a higher level of competence required to do even a power of attorney, or certainly to negotiate an annuity contract, than there is for doing a will. The competency required for doing a will is so low that most people can sign and change their will. All they really need to know is, in legal parlance, the nature and extent of their assets, just generally, and also the objects of their bounty, meaning their beneficiaries, who their friends are, who their family are. And it's a very, very low threshold. And in fact, there are even some situations, limited, but there are some situations where there could even be a court-appointed conservator and guardian appointed, and that person may still have the requisite competence to sign a will.
And so I suppose a big part of your role is monitoring for undue influence in these situations.
Yes, and even though someone might have the competency to make a will, the trouble when they're at that point where they've started sort of losing the competency is that they're much more easily influenced. So somebody might have the requisite competence to make a will, but they're in your office and one of or two of the kids brought them, and you have to wonder how much of it is because they have suggested or kind of put ideas in the person's head.
Yes.
So they have the legal competence to make a will,
Yes.
and that is the standard that we're looking for, but it can be difficult to say, are you sure this is what you really want? And they may have been convinced to the point that they say yes, but you know, because you have two grandkids bringing in grandma and she's going to leave it all to them, you know, you have to question if that's what she really wants. So again, doing things earlier when somebody isn't so susceptible to influence is best, but there's still always a chance they bring them back in to change the will later.
Right.
So it is a challenge. We have to try to determine if someone has the competency, and then also to try to get them alone. We always get them alone, and to try to determine if this is really what they want, or if they've been influenced to the point that they think it's what they want, but it's really kind of been, the seeds have been planted by, you know, maybe one of the children or a grandchild.
Yeah, I understand. So again, that's why advanced planning is good, I'm sure. So you must sometimes feel like a family therapist, I guess, in many situations, huh, that you're trying to sort things out with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to know the whole family background and network. That's an important part in the beginning part generally I have, and we both have. We both approach it the same way, and getting the family background is critically important. So being inefficient actually makes us more efficient later. And just to reinforce what Melissa just said, the undue influence issue is much more pervasive, and well, I shouldn't say pervasive. It's more of a threat to the will or any other documents that are being done, and the undue influence is something that the lawyer has a much more difficult ability to detect. Because we just don't see them being
Yes.
influenced at home or elsewhere.
Right, exactly. So you've done a lot of, you've worked with someone, estate planning. What's the effect of sudden death? Someone's driving down the highway and they get into an accident, suddenly they're gone. You had mentioned something about that previously and I felt unclear about it. Can you talk more about that?
You mean if they don't have an estate plan in place, the effect
When they don't have an estate,
Right.
I said that in reverse, thank you.
Okay.
So when they don't have an estate plan in place and there's been a sudden death, what is the impact of that upon an estate?
Well, first and foremost, the law is going to dictate how the assets pass. And so often, for example, the spouse will be entitled to the first $50,000 plus half of the remainder. And most people want everything to go to their surviving spouse, but that's not what the law provides. So the first issue is that your money may not go the way that you wanted it to, or if you didn't have children and you just had a surviving brother that you didn't get along with or whatever, he's going to get
Right.
all of your estate. It also affects who is the person who's appointed to administer your estate. The law also has an order of priority for that. So if you have a child who may not be good at that sort of thing, the law may dictate that that is the person who's first in line to do it. They could decline, but if it's somebody who may not be trustworthy with money or that sort of thing, that can be an issue.
Got it.
So.
Got it. Anything to throw in there, Chip?
Well, just the emotional component as well as the legal component. You've got people who may be making poor decisions just because it's so sudden and so unexpected. and it's just a very difficult time.
Yes,
no matter what.
yes. So something that sets my teeth on edge and raises the hairs on the back of my neck is the frequency of elder scams and elder fraud and the con artist and the cottage industry that's out there designed to prey upon our vulnerable elderly. How does this come into your practice? How do you see it showing up?
Yeah, we do see it too often, but I don't think it's as prevalent here as elsewhere. I could be wrong on that, but for example, I was talking with a recently retired elder law attorney last night in a different town in the state, and we both know this individual, myself and the person I was talking with know this, the son of the individual very well. His mom was in a different state, many states south of us, and was bound, gagged by a former caregiver and
Yikes.
2 other people, and threatened so that she had to reveal where her money and treasures were. They took off with them. They were later apprehended. She's now going through the trauma of depositions and all that. So I haven't heard of that here.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that hasn't happened, but I haven't heard of that. But there certainly is a high incidence here compared to, I think, when we were younger than there used to be. And so it definitely is a very troubling phenomenon.
Well, and I'm just going to say, just for our viewers, so that's a criminal assault. That's way worse than scam. But something that I know occurs because it happens from around the country and little is the phone scams. And so I met a woman who was bilked out of 300,000 phone scams. And someone who through her whole life was competent, professional, you would never guess this person to be subject to that type of thing. So even in our rural areas here, it's kind of a cause for me to say to people, do not give money over the phone, ever. Just don't do it. I mean, unless it's someone that you know very personally, locally.
I completely agree, and it's gotten a lot worse. And even 20 years ago, it was bad with a lot of the mailing scams, the surface mail scams.
Right.
And there were very brilliant people who were still sharp, but losing a little bit of it. And,
Yes.
And susceptible.
And because they come from that generation where they want to contribute, you know, there's that desire, they want to give, and so they're exploited. That benevolent factor within them is exploited. And like I said, it sets my teeth on edge. It's something I can't help but kind of blow the horn about every now and then. Love after loss and the impact on a new partner or spouse, on children from the first marriage.
That's a great question. And, you know, I wish that more people would get the word out to elders to at least think about possibly living in sin rather than marrying in some of these situations. Because what many people just have no clue about is that as soon as you've married, without a prenuptial agreement, which most people just say, ugh, don't want to touch them, particularly the older folks,
Right.
then there's no protection because even if both spouses keep their wills and leave everything to their kids directly and not to each other, without a prenuptial agreement, there is not only an opportunity to elect against the will, but there's an obligation in the elder law context if the surviving spouse is a main care possible candidate, then it would be a gift if they didn't require that they get 1/3 of the estate. And that's not just probate estate, that's everything that they take into kind of in they own.
Right. So the essence of it being, if it's so common, people have been divorced, they have children from previous marriages. If you're going to join your life in partnership and later in life intimacy, probably good to consult an attorney.
At least think about what your goals are afterwards and what the consequences are. Because I think a lot of people, you see the shining in their eyes and they're just not ready to even deal with any of that stuff.
Yes.
I think people also need to realize that the surviving spouse is free to change their will. So you may do your will so that you leave everything to each other, then 50% to your children, 50% to the other spouse's children. But after the first spouse passes away, there's nothing to stop the surviving spouse from disinheriting the children of the deceased spouse, which often happens particularly when a long period of time passes and they kind of lose contact with the kids. They're not really in their life anymore, and those kids basically get written out of the will. So.
Okay. I am getting signals from my technical director, Dan Bailey, that we're heading towards a wrap, and we have about 3 minutes left. What do you want to talk about? Whatever's, we had power of planning, and we had the need to meet periodically, like a kind of like an annual checkup. So
Okay, thanks. One quick little tie-in from what we were just talking about
Yes.
is that Maine Care requires that the surviving spouse elect against the will if they don't have sufficient assets to last themselves essentially 5 years. So that's another big problem with I'm not saying elders shouldn't be remarrying, they should, but they should just do it a little bit more carefully. I look through at estate planning, and Melissa does as well, but there are way too many, even attorneys and certainly most clients, only look at the documents and they say, well, there's a will, there's power of attorney, healthcare directive, that's all we have to have. Well, there's a lot to go into that, but in addition to the estate planning documents, you need to look and focus on how you hold title to the assets. Are they owned jointly? Are they held solely? Who are your beneficiary designations? Because if your will says everything goes to whomever, but your beneficiary designations are something else, then the beneficiary designations control over what your will says, because the will only controls what's only in your name with no designated beneficiary. The third prism, in addition to estate planning documents and asset titling, is life planning. Think about long-term care insurance. Think about Maine Care planning. Think about any real estate succession planning. So there's a lot to the whole bundle of estate planning.
Okay, thank you. Anything to throw into that?
Can I say something on a topic we were on before
Please,
about
yes.
the elder scams?
Please.
Something that stuck with me that I heard someone from Legal Services of the Elderly say was that, why does this elderly person pick up the phone and talk to this person in Jamaica or whatever and give them the money? And the point he made was that for a lot of these people, that may be the only phone call that they got in that
Precisely.
week, that month. And for somebody to just say, hi, how are you? And to kind of have a conversation with them, it's social contact that they're missing. And so they may develop a relationship with this person who's a total stranger who's trying to scam them because they're basically lonely and isolated. So one of the best ways to kind of address or prevent that if you are a child or a loved one is to stay involved and to visit and to call, because if you're not, then somebody else might be.
Yes, you're so precisely right with that, and that's exactly the person they're looking to exploit, the person who's lonely. That brings us to a close. Melissa, thank you very much. Chip, thank you
Steve.
very much.
You're great.
That's another episode of Spotlight on Seniors. Thanks for being with us. It was a great show today. Look forward to seeing you the next time.